What's up guys, welcome back to the channel and to another weekly 3D model. So as some of you may know, I took a few weeks off to travel across the country and move into my new place. There is, however, still a lot of work needed, so the next few weeks are going to be quite busy. But since I took a few weeks off, I thought I should make a quick video just so I can start getting the ball rolling again. So I decided to make this 1930s Depression era 22 long rifle ammo box. I really like the images of this old ammo box, so I thought it would just be a lot of fun to recreate. So let's just dive into it. Alright, so to start things off, we're going to select the cube and we can start blocking out that outside box. So all I'm going to do here is just delete those outside faces. I want to have one side open and the other side closed, so we're going to start off with the closed side. So I'm just going to give it a little bit of thickness, and then I can start adding a few edge loops and then extruding one of the sides so I can close this end of the box. And I'm not going to worry too much about getting those dimensions right now. We can just get the box in its rough blocked out state, and then we can start adjusting those vertices and the scale of these objects just to make it look a little bit more like our reference photo. Now I found this photo online, just on Google, and this is what I'm using for my main reference for this model. Alright, so now that we have the main folded piece on the box done, we're just going to do the exact same thing to the sides. So I'm going to add two more edge loops on each side of the box, and then I can extrude those faces similar to how we just did the other one, and I can just close it in behind this flap. All I'm trying to do is just make it look like the box realistically folds in on itself and it's closed. Alright, so the end of our box is blocked out. Now we can just bevel out those two top edges on our box just to round out those edges. And then we can start working on the opposite end of our box. Now this one's going to be open. I want those bullets to be halfway coming out of the box. So we're going to do the exact same process as we just did, but rather than folding it in closed, we're going to leave it open. Now if you wanted to make your life a little bit easier, you could actually import some image planes. Just like using that same reference I'm using for this model, we could just import those in our side view, and then I can model this box around that just so I can save myself some time from rescaling it afterwards. But like I usually do in all of these videos, I'm just going off of my reference on my other monitor, so we're not going to import any image planes or anything like that. We're just trying to wing it by just guessing our dimensions, and we can adjust it along the way. So for the end here, like most of these little boxes, they have a tiny little flap that folds in to keep it closed. So all I'm going to do is select that one edge where that fold or crease is going to go, and then we can just bevel it to give it a little thickness. And later on, we're going to extrude those faces so I have a small bump there, just to act as if some crease is in the cardboard. Alright, so now our main outside box is all blocked out. We're going to do the inside box that holds the bullets. So we're just going to take the same shape, I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to remove all of the faces, just delete them, except for the sides and the bottom. I'm also going to remove those edges from the bevels on the bottom of the box. That way it's just going to fit really snug, and I know the dimensions are going to be very accurate to the outside box we already created. And then all I have to do is just fill in all of these empty holes on our box, and then we can start blocking out this shape. And then just like we did the outside box, I'm going to do the exact same thing for the inside. So we're going to add two edge loops on the outside, just on the bottom, and then I can select those faces on the end and just extrude them so they kind of close in on themselves. It looks like this box is just folded and glued together, so that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to have the two outside ones coming in, almost touching, and then the big one on the bottom is going to wrap around them both, and it's just going to hover there and act as if it's kind of held by some adhesive or some glue. And just to save myself a little bit of time, I'm actually going to model just half of this box. I don't need to show the other side since it's going to be inside and you're not going to see anything. So we're just going to fake it and only model this one side. Alright, so our main inside box shape is complete. So now I'm just going to unhide everything, and I'm going to take that inside box and scale it down a little bit to fit really snug inside of our outside box. I'm also going to take that inside box and slide it out a little bit so we can see the bullets on the inside once we add them. And then I can start folding in that outside flap that I mentioned earlier. I want it to look a little bit like a used box, and all the cardboard or whatever material it is wouldn't be completely flat. It would be folded from being closed in its original state. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're just going to take that one edge loop and I'm going to bevel it again and just extrude those faces so I have a tiny little bump where that crease would be. Alright, so our box is looking good, and honestly we could have just kept it in this state, more of a low poly model, but I decided I wanted to smooth it out by hitting 3 on my keyboard. But as you see, everything is just going to collapse on itself because there's no supporting edges. So what we're going to do is start adding a few edge loops just on all of those hard edges so it can help support those corners. And then when I hit 3 on my keyboard and smooth it out, it's going to retain that shape and it's going to look a little bit better in my opinion. But like I mentioned, this is definitely not necessary. It's just going to add more polys to your scene. So depending on how you actually want to use this model, you don't really have to do this part. Now I'm just going to speed up this next little portion of the video since all I'm doing is adding a few edge loops and just making sure all my edges are nice and curved and trying to get the box to look a little bit more realistic. Alright, so our main box shapes are all complete. Now we can move on to those bullets. So we're going to select a cylinder and we can start blocking out that main bullet shape. Now this is modeled off of a 22 caliber bullet. Not exactly sure my bullets and all this, but however it is modeled off of a specific size. So what I should have done is imported one of those image planes like that reference photo I was using, and that way I could have modeled this bullet to its actual specific size. However, in this case, I'm just more or less winging it, so we're just gonna guesstimate how the shape of this bullet actually is. So like I mentioned, we're gonna start off with that cylinder and I can start just extruding one of those edges to get it in one of those generic bullet shapes. Now, since I'm not modeling this over an image plane or some sort of schematic, I am gonna have to play around with the shape a little bit to make it look a little bit more realistic and accurate to my reference photo. I also want it to fit properly in my box. So what I'm going to do is adjust my box size after I'm done this bullet. Since I know there's going to be 5 bullets in each row, I can move one of these bullets inside and I can start scaling that box so it fits accurately to how it is in real life. So let's just continue playing around with this bullet shape until I get it into a shape that I'm happy with. Alright, so since we have one of these bullets basically complete, just before I start duplicating it a bunch of times to fill up my bullet box, I just want to UV it ahead of time to save myself from doing the extra work. So that's exactly what we're going to do. I'm going to go ahead and open up my UV editor, and I can start UVing the shape. So I'm just going to make sure I freeze transformation, center pivot, and delete history, and I can go to my UV tab and do a camera-based projection. That's just going to remove all of those cuts, and then I can go in with the 3D cut and sew UV tool, and I can start creating cuts wherever I want them on the model. So I'm going to start off with creating one on the very bottom. There is an imprint of a letter U on these bullets, so to make sure I get no stretching, I'm just going to do one cut directly on the bottom so that UV shell is nice and straight. It also transitions on the side from a gold material to more of like a rougher metal on the tip of the bullet. So I'm going to do a cut right where roughly that transition would happen. That way in Substance Painter it's going to make applying those materials a lot easier for myself. There's also some little bumps or imprints on the sides of the bullet near the top, so I'm going to make one extra cut near the tip of the bullet. That way I'm not going to have any weird stretches when I start making those little imprints into the bullet. So now that that's looking good, I can select all of those UV shells, Control U to unfold them, and then I can start just rotating them to fit a little bit better on my UV editor. Now I'm going to make sure I straighten these shells, so under the Unfold tab I'm going to straighten UVs, and that way when I apply those materials I'm not going to get any weird stretches. It's always good to straighten your shells whenever you can in your UV editor. That way you're not going to get any weird stretches, and it just saves you a little bit of space on your UV map. Now I'm going to keep turning on that checkered board just to make sure I'm not getting any weird stretches. I am, however, on the very tip of the bullet stretching a little bit, but it's not going to matter since it's just a plain material. You're not going to be able to notice. So now that that's all looking good, I can go ahead and start duplicating the shape a bunch of times to fill up my box. Now, like I mentioned before, I do know that there's 5 bullets in each row. They alternate from sitting upright to upside down. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to duplicate one of these over first. I can rotate it 180 degrees, and I can position that right beside my bullet. Once that's looking good, I can start duplicating those same 2 bullets over again to create a row of 5. And once I fit those nicely inside my box, I can start duplicating a bunch of rows just to fill up this whole ammo box. Now I know my box isn't going to fit perfectly snug with my bullets just because I didn't model it off of any image planes or schematics. So just before I start UVing my box, I can start scaling these shapes to fit a little bit more snug with those bullets. That way it just looks a little bit more realistic to its true shape. So let's just continue on and start filling up this ammo box. Alright, so I'm not going to fill up the bullet box all the way to the back. You're not going to see the back of the box, so it's just really unnecessary having all those extra objects in my scene. So I'm not going to worry about that. I am, however, just going to duplicate 2 more bullets on the side. I thought it would look cool having one laying flat and one just sitting upright. Alright, so I thought we were basically done this model, but I quickly realized in my reference photo there's a little notch or a little cutout on the very top. It just makes it easier for you to pull out those bullets. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're just going to add 3 edge loops on the top of those faces, and then in the middle vertices I can just move those inwards a little bit to create a little indent or a little half circle on the top of the box. Alright, so all of the modeling is basically complete. Now we just really quickly have to UV our box since we've only UV'd those bullets. So normally I would do the exact same process, do a camera-based projection to remove all those cuts, and then I can go into my 3D cut and sew UV tool and then create my own wherever I want them. So since this shape is basically a bunch of rectangles, I know that automatic UV is going to work relatively well. It's also just going to save me a bunch of time since I'm trying to do this really quickly. So that's exactly what we're going to do. I'm going to select my box and just go UV automatic, and it's going to cut it pretty well along those edges. For the most case, it does a pretty good job, and this is going to work well for this shape. All I have to do is just go in and move some of these UV shells around just to fit a little bit better on my UV editor. So rather than just leaving these shells as they are from the automatic, it hasn't really prioritized the larger shapes in my object. For example, the outside faces are clearly more important, and the inside of the box you're not going to really see. So there's no point having them take up the same amount of space in my UV maps. So what I'm going to do is move all of these shells to the side. I can go ahead and select all of those main shells on the outside of my box, and I can Control L to lay those ones out just so I can prioritize those shapes. All of the other ones, I'm going to do the exact same thing, lay them out, but positioning those around those larger UV shells that I need to take up more resolution. Basically, all of those faces that you're not going to see, there's no point in taking up so much space in my UV map. It's just unnecessary. So I decided just to combine the bullets and the inside box as one texture. So that's exactly what I'm doing, is I'm just moving these bullets to fit around the box UV that we created earlier. And then I can just apply a material to these, so I have one texture that's applied to both the bullets and the inside box on this model. Now it's up to you however you want to break down your model. I decided to go with two different textures, so one for the outside box and one for all the inside components. But you could easily just combine this into one texture if you really wanted to. It's not a big object, so it's really up to you. Now I did the exact same thing for the outside box. I just did an automatic UV as well, and I once again just prioritized those larger UV shells that I need. So all of the inside of the box are going to take up a very small amount of space in my UV map, and the outside ones where those main graphics are going to take up a larger space. And just like that, all of our UVs are done, and we are ready to jump into Substance Painter so we can start texturing. Alright, so now over in Substance Painter, we can go ahead and load in our FBX file from Maya. So once that model is loaded in and everything is looking good, you can go over to your texture set settings and scroll down to Bake Mesh Maps. So you can choose your output size. I chose 4K, and make sure to check on that use low poly mesh as high poly mesh, since we only have one mesh to work with. And you can play around some of these other settings, but they're good enough for now. We can just go ahead and bake those textures. Alright, so we're ready to start texturing. So I'm going to start off with my very first texture in my texture set list, which is my outer box. So I'm going to start with creating one layer. We're going to name it top, and I can start applying that top graphic. So I found that image on Google. We're just going to drag that in as a texture, and then using my projection tool right below the eraser, I can start projecting that texture or that graphic directly onto my box. So all I have to do is scroll down into the base color, and I can drag on that texture that I imported, and then I can start just drawing directly onto my model. Now, because I didn't use any schematics or anything like that, some of the shapes may be a little bit off, but we're just going to try to make it work and make it look accurate to the true size of this box. So all I did was just turn up that roughness value a little bit, since I don't want the box too reflective. And like I mentioned, you can just go ahead and paste it directly onto the top face of my box. So all I did was, using that reference photo I found on Google, I just brought that into Photoshop and cut it into their own and individual photos. So the top has its own photo, the bottom is its own, and so forth. That way I can just individually drag in each photo, and I can apply them to all the different sides of my box. So using the exact same process we just did, I'm going to drag in the side image, and I can create another layer, call it left or right, and then using that projection tool, I can project that image directly onto the sides of my box. So I'm just going to continue that exact same process until all of my sides of my boxes have those graphics applied, and then we can start adding some other details and eventually start texturing those bullets. Alright, so as you can see, there's still some faces on my box that need that texture applied. Now they don't have graphics, so I can't just project on that graphic like we did to all the other faces. So I'm gonna do these ones a little bit different. So all I'm gonna do is just add a fill layer, and I can drag that to the very bottom of my layers, and I can just eye drop that exact same yellowish, whitish color on my graphics. That way it's just gonna fill in all the empty space of my model, since it's gonna be the exact same color as those graphics I applied, and it's just gonna look consistent throughout the whole model. Now I'm still getting some weird black lines and stuff from when I projected those graphics, so I'm going to do the exact same process. I'm going to create another fill layer, but this time I'm going to keep it on the very top of my layers, and I can turn that into a black mask, and then I'm going to eye drop the exact same color so that bottom and top fill layer are the exact same. And then all I'm going to do is just select a dirt brush or whatever brush you like, and I can start painting on top of all those black lines. Basically all those little imperfections from those projected images I pasted on, we're just going to cover those up and start painting over it. Alright, so the box is looking good, but it's just looking a little bit too clean, especially compared to those graphics that I have on there. So what we're going to do is add another fill layer, and I can go over to my masks tab and find a cool grungy dirt effect that I'd like, and I can drag that directly onto my fill layer. And then I can go ahead and do the exact same thing, add another fill layer on top of that, and I can start layering on different dirt and grunge effects over top of one another. I always find if you add different grunge effects on top of each other, even if they're very minimal, it starts to add a little bit more realism to the model rather than having just one type of dirt on top of it. So I'm just going to really quickly jump to our other texture now, which is the bullets in the inside box, and I'm just going to copy over that same material we applied to the box. So that yellow color, I'm just going to copy it over and I can reapply to that inside box. Now this one was showing a little bit more of white in my reference photos, so that's exactly what we're going to do. We're just going to change the color. Rather than being a more yellow tone, we're going to make it a little bit more white. And once I have that base color applied, I can go ahead and start adding a few extra dirt and grunge effects on top of that. Alright, so the inside box is looking good. Last but not least are all of these bullets. Now this is pretty straightforward. I'm going to go over to my Smart Materials tab, and I'm going to choose that bronze armor material and apply it to my bullets. Now I'm just going to turn off a lot of those dirt and grunge effects, so the surface details and the dirt. I don't need all those layers since these bullets are relatively shiny. I don't want them to look too beaten up. And once I'm happy with the color, I can go ahead, turn that to a black mask, and then assign it to that mesh. So next up is just the tip of the bullet. So for this I used another Smart material. I decided to use that Iron Forged, and once again turn off all that dirt and grunge. And once I'm happy with the color, I can turn that to a black mask, but rather than using mesh fill and assigning it to the whole object, I'm going to go UV chunk fill so I can assign it to those specific UV chunks on the tip of my bullet. That's a big reason why I did those cuts on this model earlier when we were doing the UVs. It just makes applying these materials a lot easier if I make those cuts in certain areas that I know are going to change in materials. Alright, so now we can start tweaking some of these colors, and I can add a tiny bit of dirt and grunge on the top of this bullet just so it doesn't look too clean. Alright, so last but not least, for these bullets there's some tiny little imprints or some little engraved bumps on the sides of them. So this is pretty straightforward. All I'm going to do is just create another fill layer, but I'm going to turn off all of those channels so I only have a height channel applied. Then I'm just going to go over to my brushes and I'm going to choose one of these stitches brushes. Really any of these brushes will work. I just want something to give me a dotted sort of pattern. So all I'm going to do is just drag down that height channel so I can engrave it into the bullet. And then I can start just drawing directly on top of that mesh. Now I'm just going to tweak some of the settings a tiny bit just so I can have a smaller dash between all those stitches. I don't want it to look like an actual stitching effect. I just want them to be some little engraved tiny bumps that will loop around the whole model. And this is another big reason why we straightened our UV shells while we were doing those UVs. If my UV shell was crooked, applying this straight line with all these engravings would be a little bit more difficult. Alright, so I'm just going to tweak some of these settings and add a few extra small dirt and scratch effects on the side of my bullet, and then we can start adding those engraved U's that are on the bottom of these bullets. Alright, so now for those little U's on the bottom of the bullet, it's the exact same process as those tiny little dots we did around. We're going to create another fill layer. I'm going to turn off all of those channels so I only have a height channel, and I can drag down that slider so we can engrave it into the metal. And then all I have to do is go over to my Alphas tab, and I can go choose whatever font I'd like to imprint that letter U. I'm not exactly sure what this U stands for, but it is in the reference, so I definitely want to add it. Alright, cool, so all of our textures are applied. Now we can quickly jump into the renderer to see how things are looking. And then all I'm going to do here is just change that background lighting from panorama to one of those studio lights. And then I can check on to have a clear ground since I want to have just a clear image. And then I can raise that floor to match the very bottom of my model. Now at this point when you're seeing it in the renderer, there's usually a bunch of things that jump out at you that need tweaking. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to jump back into the editor and I can start tweaking some colors and some settings and some different grunge effects to get the model in a more finalized state. And then we can wrap everything up. So I'm just going to fast forward this next portion of the video since that's all I'm doing is just jumping back and forth and just tweaking some of these materials that we already have applied. I always find that this is the longest portion of my modeling when it comes to creating these little assets, is the very end when you're just tweaking things. You can just continuously add very small details and little different grunge effects, and slowly as you build these different effects up, it starts to look really realistic. So if I could give any advice at this point, is just really take your time at the end of the model. I know most people just want to wrap things up, but at this point you can spend hours, if not even days, just tweaking things and coming back and looking at it with a fresh pair of eyes. And there's always something that will jump out at you that needs a little bit of tweaking. So let's go ahead and just finalize all of these materials and then we can wrap up the model. Alright, so that's basically everything. That is the whole modeling, UVing, and texturing process that I did to create these old 1930s 22 long rifle bullet pack. Now you'll notice in some of my final renders, I do have a bunch of closed boxes in the background, and all I did for that is quickly jump into Maya, and I just closed up one of those ends that we had opened, and then I just positioned the same model around this one and then re-exported it, and then using that project configure in your Substance settings, you can just reload in that same model, and it'll just reapply all those materials since we haven't changed anything. So you can just move some of your models around if you want to make some final adjustments. So that's the only thing I ended up doing at the very end, just having a bunch of closed boxes. But other than that, that's everything that I did to create this little tiny asset. I know I had a few weeks off as I was traveling, and the next few weeks are going to be pretty hectic, so I'm going to try to create as many models as I can when I get the time. But soon enough, I will be right back to my once a week models, and we'll get back into the rhythm of things. I really hope you guys enjoyed this week's video, and if you did, give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to see more weekly 3D content. Once again, thank you all for the support, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.